Good afternoon, everybody. We'll give a couple more minutes for people to join in. Okay, I don't want to keep anybody waiting too long. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Water Board Seminar Series. My name is Peter Haupt, and I'm a scientific aide with the State Water Board's Office of Information Management and Analysis. Thank you for attending today's seminar. All seminars are open to the public and recorded for posting in the details of the corresponding event on the College of Water Informatics events webpage. There will be a question and answer period at the end of the talk, so please hold your questions until today's speaker has finished his presentation. Everyone except the speaker will be muted until this time to avoid disturbing the talk. During the Q&A session, we will post a very brief survey. Please make sure to fill it out so we can continue to improve the seminar experience. Today's speaker is Mr. Moritz Botha. Moritz has been a leader at the intersection of operational technology and information technology and its application in industrial control systems in the connected environment. Over the past 30 years, he has developed large-scale, highly secure industrial controls for multinational companies. He founded numerous tech businesses, and at XIO, he designed the architecture for an extensive and secured cloud-based system, Scada, otherwise known as supervisory control and data acquisition. These are for distributed industrial control systems to address the limitations of traditional Scada. With that, please welcome Mr. Botha.
Thank you so much, Peter. Let me just start sharing my screen here. It's a pleasure to join you guys on a real scorcher of a day. Like Peter said, my name is Moritz Botha. I'm a co-founder of XIO, and I'm part of a really talented multidisciplinary engineering team designing these distributed control systems. The business that we're in is water, and water by nature is very distributed, because if you think most cases, somebody has a tank or a collection of tanks or reservoirs, and it's typically up on a hill so that they can gravity feed something. And a couple of miles away, or even hundreds of miles away, there is some well or some source of the water itself. Think San Francisco with HHE is a similar model. It's a vastly distributed water system that provides water for a lot of the people in the state. So what we're going to talk about today is, I'll just give a brief overview of what we see industrial control systems are. And then I'll just give a brief overview of supervisory control and data acquisition so that we're just all on the same page. I'll give you a couple of use cases, quite a few of them as a matter of fact, just to give an idea of what can be accomplished if we rethink this problem and approach it in a new way. Then we will do a little bit of a comparison between the traditional models and what is now the cloud-based ones. What are the pitfalls of each and how that works? And then finally, we'll look at a number of use cases like saving energy by still pumping the same amount of water, lift stations and preventing overflows and spills in these lift stations, leak detection, and then something that is really important given the droughts that we face is this overuse of aquifers, and to have some sense of how it actually recharges. And obviously all of that, given our day and age, is in a very tight security blanket. So let's talk about the typical industrial control system architecture. And I think one of the things that a lot of people are not aware of is how intertwined our lives are with industrial control systems. There is practically nothing in our modern world that hasn't been touched by an industrial control system. If you purchase something from an online vendor, then some control system was likely to pick this object that you purchase from a shelf somewhere and automatically package that. Or our food production, the water production, energy production, everything um, is touched by industrial control systems. Now, the very, very high level genetic architecture is you've got a smart device called a controller that reads values from sensors. So a sensor can be anything like a light switch at your door. It can be something like a pressure sensor that measures the pressure of water or something else. It may be something that measures the wind speed, or a water meter that gives pulses to show how much water is being pumped. An actuator, on the other hand, is something like a big contactor, or think about these big switches that you always see in the movies. So when the smart device reads a value from a sensor, it can tell the actuator to do something. Typical use case is you have a tank, the tank level drops below a certain value, the smart device senses that, the controller, and then sends a command to the actuator to start a pump to fill your tank. And more and more in the new world is that this is connected to some computing horsepower. In the past, what they called these devices, and actually still very, very dominant in industry, these are called RTUs, or real remote terminal units, typically remote, or programmable logic controllers, smart devices that can interact with field devices. And then on the computing horsepower, typically you had these Scada systems, supervisory control and data acquisition. I'll get into the context of that a little bit more. The long and the short is, it is, again, watching the movies, it's whenever people show industrial plants, there's a screen and somebody sits in front of the screen and it flashes red or something showing something is wrong. That is typically the SCADA system. What it gives people the ability to do is to interact with these smart devices, or to see information from these smart devices, and then indirectly from the sensors, so that you have a remote view of what is going on in your system. Nowadays, there's a new kid on the block, and these are called IoT devices, or Industrial Internet of Things. IoT is just the Internet of Things. Essentially, that's the smart home type idea. So I've got smart cameras and smart light switches and everything in my house. Those are Industrial Internet of Things devices. But you also get the industrial version of that that's specifically geared towards industrial control systems. And we'll delve into that a little bit deeper in a few slides. And then finally, the new world also has a cloud platform. And that is actually where we see the game changer. So think about this is, a while back, I bought a new car. So I went into the dealership, and at the end, they wanted to sell me a GPS for my car. And it was rather expensive. And my question to the salesperson was, so this GPS comes on a DVD. I'm driving off this lot, and that map that you have on there is already dated. Why would I do that? Because I can use my smartphone and use an application like Google Maps, and not only do I get the most up-to-date maps, I also get information about the traffic density and which streets to avoid on the route that I'm traveling. So in that sentence, in that example, is where we see the difference, what the internet can bring to SCADA systems, the traditional SCADA systems being the equivalent of the old GPS that's installed in the car, and the new cloud-based world that is the equivalent of what you get with something like a Google Maps or a Waze application. So let's continue with this foundation, and let's talk about system attributes. One of the most important things is eye availability. The idea is, if I have something that has to do with water production, I don't want it to be offline for most of the day. As a matter of fact, I want it to be available all the time. And for a long time, it wasn't an issue. But what we've seen recently, a number of our customers, with all the fires in California, as well as the preemptive shutdown of the electrical grid, the availability of their control systems just went away because they lost their power. The second part is reliability. These devices typically work in the field, and they have to work for a very, very long time without breaking. The next one is fault tolerance, and that is to say, if something bad happens, so suppose I get a reading from a tank and I lose that tank level, does that mean everything is shut down? And if that is the case, what do I do to keep on producing safe water, because people rely on that? The next area is resiliency. And resiliency is to say, well, if there was a fire and now you bring the system back up, how easy is it to restore your service? Or in more practical terms, in our world of cybersecurity and things like ransomware, is if everything is locked up, do I have a backup? And if I have one, how easy and how fast can I restore that backup? And that brings in the other aspect of security and the different models of security. Because in the past, everything in terms of industrial control systems in the water and wastewater industry, the security was focused on the physical security of the devices. And what we see now is there's a whole new world with state-sponsored rogue actors that come and cause a security threat for these type of devices. What we've done is we've created a new architecture, and we call this architecture cloud augmented real-time control. So the whole idea is you've got a smart device that can work independently, and it will always do what it needs to do. So if it needs to pump water, if a tank is too low, it will do that. When the cloud becomes available, this smart system will do things like predicting when to start the pumps, so that when the electrical rate changes occur and it gets more expensive, the tanks are full so that you don't have to pump whenever the electricity is more expensive. So let's look at the main uses of SCADA and specifically the data associated with SCADA. The first one is operations, is I want to make sure that if my pump needs to run right now, does it run? The second one is regulatory compliance. So I may need the data to file regulatory reports. And then there's a big opportunity in this data to use that to make our systems way, way more efficient. And I'll show a couple of examples in the use cases. So if we look at the time frames, the first one for the operations, it's all about the now. Is what is supposed to happen right now happening or not? The second one about the regulatory compliance is typically monthly. People have to file regulatory reports to the State Water Board on a monthly basis. And then finally, there's this efficiency thing. And unfortunately, most of the traditional SCADA systems do nothing about that, is to say, given our experience and observing a number of different systems, I see that if you do this, you can make the system way, way more efficient. And that is where the cloud gives us this power, in the same way as Google Maps gives us the ability to avoid traffic hotspots. This is where there's a lot of easy picking to do if we can access the data in a secure and meaningful way. Because there is a new driver in this thing, right? It is convenience. It is the convenience that I can access something remotely and make my own workday more efficient. And that can be caused by natural disasters. Like a while ago, we had one of our customers evacuated because there was a wildfire in their vicinity. He could still access his water system remotely, and change the levels so that the tanks stay full in case the fire brigade needs the water. In the old world, there was no way to do that because you had to be on premise. We've seen COVID, same thing. City of San Jose is a perfect example. Very early in this COVID-19 epidemic, somebody on the staff of one of the water systems, they contracted COVID, and they were not allowed to come into the office. Long story short, they had to pay some consultants a lot of money to manage the system on their behalf. Had they had secure remote access, it would have been easy. Another driver for this whole thing, or the need for remote access, is other industries. We are used to a world where I can check my order status, or I can check my bank balance, or I can even transfer money to somebody else from the convenience of my couch in the living room using my smartphone. So with that little bit of context, this is where we are in California. We've got over 600 systems in California, both water and wastewater. And on the water side, we've got both domestic, industrial, and agricultural uses. We've got big clusters of users in Sonoma County, and as you can see on the map there, in Ventura County. And the great thing for us is this is a massive distributed system that uses the same time base for everything. So even though we get around 60 million data reports from all the systems per day, everything is time synchronized. So when something happens, we can always reference back and see and look at the different cause effects. So one of the case studies is Caltrans' REST stops. So here's a map that's rather busy and very difficult to see on a small screen. And let me just take a lot of the clutter away. Caltrans has these 12 districts, and on a lot of the freeways, they have rest stops. These rest stops provide water and, in most cases, have to treat wastewater for everything that is produced there. But they've got a couple of unique requirements, and those are hierarchical. So in Sacramento, the engineers may want to see an overview of the system. What is happening at all our rest stops? How does the performance of this one compare to another one? We may have had some experimental new treatment for something at one stop. How does that compared to something more traditional at a different one. Then each one of these districts may have 2 or more of these rest stops, and the manager of the district may want to do coordination to say, okay, let's go and schedule maintenance of some device at a specific time. And then they can see when the most usage occurs, and then can schedule something around that. And then thirdly, there's the system. On the system level, there are the people actually looking after the system. So sometimes they have to travel hundreds of miles or to go and look at the system, because you have to be a licensed water operator to look after the water production. So case in the point is, I'll show you an example of a system called, let me just get to Wesley. Wesley is one of the first ones that we did. Very simple system. It consists of a well, some sodium hypochlorite, and a reservoir, and then they have a hydropneumatic tank. In the first week after we've provisioned the system, there was an accident and somebody took out one of the main power poles providing power to the system. And the operator got an alarm, but could see the trend of what the reservoir is, what the level of the reservoir is, and could determine, well, there's no need for me to go and pay somebody overtime to come and fix it. We've got enough water on hand so that we can wait until the next morning. You can see here on the screens that we typically produce, there's a wealth of information about the system that you can progressively dig deeper into. And one of the main things just on a global scale for California is the mandate by the governor that each producer of water has to report how much water they're actually producing. So one of the main things that we do in systems too is to actually measure the amount of water produced. And here you can see the 2 different pumps. The one is way superior in its production capabilities, but you can see everything as it happens during the last week and get all the meaningful statistics about that. Here's another example, a Collier Tunnel, also one of the Caltrans rest stops. This is what we do with the wastewater, and you can see a lot of information, probably more than you want to know about what is actually happening with the septic tank and everything there. So on a remote basis, people that have to travel a lot can now manage by exception and don't have to just go there on a regularly scheduled maintenance or otherwise a weekly schedule that they used to do, because sometimes something bad happens within that period, and now at least they would know about that. The system also gives the operators the ability to interact with each one of the devices, so they can change lead lag. Means that if the level drops below a certain level, the first pump will come on, the lag pump will come on later if the first one cannot keep up. So we measure all kinds of efficiency. And one of the other benefits of providing a cloud-based service is we can actually aggregate all the information from the systems that we manage. So we capture the institutional knowledge. In the water business, there's this concept that they call the great tsunami, where a lot of the older folks are resigning or retiring from service, and there are very few people to replace them. So the cloud gives us the perfect ability to put that in context, so that when an alarm condition occurs, we don't just tell people there's an alarm, we give them context, and we also give them potential ways of recovering from that. And this is a pretty picture, except that's not what is out there. Out there are a lot of very traditional old systems. And Oldsmar was a real wake-up call that created awareness for some of the issues that we've seen. So just as a quick summary, Oldsmar is the small town in Florida, and on February the 8th, I believe, they discovered somebody broke into their system and changed the sodium hydroxide concentration from 100 parts per million to 10,000, essentially making the water that was produced poisonous. Fortunately, there was a very well-trained and aware operator noticed that and actually reversed the operations. You can think about the consequences, what could have happened there. And this is where the important intersections of IT, the information technology, and OT, the operational technology, is really important. Because if you think about information technology, if you have a cyber event and you lose data or you lose service, it is embarrassing, it's inconvenient, and you may lose some money. If you have a cyber event in an operational technology like critical infrastructure that we're talking about here, it is still embarrassing, it's still inconvenient, but it is dangerous because lives are at stake and people can get hurt because this affects real lives. Now, the main issue with these traditional systems is the security model was based on complete trust, meaning that if you have access, physical access to a room, you can do whatever you need to do or whatever you want to do. And that worked as long as you had a badge or a tag that will allow you into the building. But now what we see more and more, remember the first driver is people want remote access. And that remote access, the number 3 here on the Scada system, is where the problem came for Oldsmar. They used an application called TeamViewer, and TeamViewer allowed somebody unlimited access to the Scada server. In other words, anybody in the world, given the right credentials, could manipulate everything on that Scada system as though they were right in front of that screen. So the issue here is that the traditional security model never took into account that people may want to do remote access. Compare that to a new world where what we have is what we call field installable units, and these on the left-hand side here are just smart controllers. They're reliable, they're fault tolerant, they've got smart local control, meaning they can work without the presence of the cloud, but they all also have built-in limits. So think about the issue at Oldsmar. The big issue there was somebody maliciously came in and changed a value. Now, if you step back and say, why should it be possible to change something from benign to be poisonous? Wouldn't it make sense to put in a limit in the controller itself? Yeah, the answer is unequivocally yes. You should be able to do that. The fact is, it's not done in most of the systems. This new world gives us the ability to put these limits in so that even if people try and accidentally or maliciously change these values to be outside the range, it won't get applied. The system will just ignore that. What the cloud augmentation gives you is everything here in the cloud, like smart alarms, like a historian where you can do all the data collection and analytics after the fact. But what it also gives you is journaling. So you can always see who did what, where, and when. And on top of that, on the red there, you've got authentication and authorization. So somebody needs to be authenticated first based on their physical location, based on their credentials, maybe based on who they are. If you take in the new capabilities of the smartphones to do fingerprint recognition or facial recognition, and then you have authorization. And what the authorization does is it says You're a manager, you can do whatever you need to do. Or you're just a viewer, therefore you're not allowed to manually run a pump or perform operations other than looking at a report, for example. Now, if we look at the architectures of, or the topologies of this new world, we've got these, at the top there, we've got these field installable units. They can really easily talk to each other. They use radio networks that are secured so that they can talk to each other. So in this example, on the left-hand side, you see there's a tank and a pump. The tank can broadcast its level, and a collection of pumps can then decide, okay, maybe I should start pumping now to fill this thing up. That control, this is the real-time smart control that's independent of the cloud. Then it's connected to a cell modem and or a satellite modem to give redundancy, communicates to the system in the cloud, and that is where you can do intelligent things like leak detection or prediction on when systems have to start. We also have other topologies where people already have internet connections, in which case we add a secure router so that we essentially have a VPN network so that the devices live, coexist independently with the customer system. So we don't harm the customer information doesn't harm us. So why is this important? It's important because this distributed nature, like I said earlier, is what we see in the water business. The Public Policy Institute of California in 2018 showed this graph showing the amount of energy that is used in water. And if you look at that, 175,000 gigawatt hours was used in the water sector itself. That is a lot of energy in any language. But if you go further in the report that I referenced, there is 10% of the state's greenhouse gases are attributed to water production. 20% of the state's electricity is used for water production, and 30% of the natural gases used for treating and heating the water attributed to water itself. So wouldn't it be nice if we can actually save energy by but still produce the same amount of water? And what this distributed nature, given the topology that I showed earlier, gives us is it helps us to optimize systems. We have a customer here that is an agricultural customer. They've got 11 pumps. The smallest pump is around 250 horsepower. And they, during the summer months, they pretty much pump continuously, but also based on demand from their customers. So they've got an intermediate reservoir and they pump into that reservoir. What we've started doing is scheduling the pumps based on the most efficient pump, because as the season progresses, the aquifer levels change. I'll show you an example of how we monitor that. When those levels change, the pumps become more or less efficient because they were designed for a specific head or the distance that they have to pump the water from the aquifer to the surface. So if you look at the details in this screenshot, you'll see the first one, there's a trigger level. And if you look at all the different pumps, the trigger levels are different. And what that means is as the reservoir drops down, the pump with the highest level will come in first. And then followed by the second one, if it cannot keep up, followed by the third one up to the 11th one. You'll also see there's something that says efficiency order. And this just means the order in which the pumps will start running. And then thirdly, you'll see there's some information about how people can disable a pump. Now, by just doing that, monitoring everything every single day, we give the customer the ability to re-rank all their pumps the next day based on the efficiency of the previous day. I also mentioned the journaling, so you can see the user updated the ranking on specific days. So we always have a record of actually what has happened in the system. So let's compare traditional SCADA with a cloud-based SCADA system. I think the first one is the feature set. The difference is when you buy a traditional system, you get what you pay for and it doesn't change. What the cloud does, it gives us the ability to update something and all the customers inherit it automatically. Again, the Google Maps example is if they roll out an upgrade to Google Maps, everybody will get that update immediately. The main data usage for traditional systems is day-to-day plant operations. In cloud-based SCADA systems, it's the same, but there's a big emphasis on the analytics. I'm not going to go into the rest in more detail because the benefits will become obvious if we see what is happening here. But there is a big issue, and the issue is this, is these old traditional systems are easy to find. There is this search engine out there called Showdown. I mean, this is the front page of Showdown. What it allows you to do is to search for these unprotected devices, making them a really, really easy target for attack. So just look at that. Websites are just one part of the internet. There are power plants, smart TVs, refrigerator, and much more that can be found on Showdown. So I've got this smart home, a lot of smart devices. I don't trust one of them because I can find my smart devices on Showdown. And if I can find that, everybody else with malicious intent can find that too. So if we look at the security responsibilities of traditional systems, the operator is responsible for everything. In the cloud world is people that really know what they do and spend every living day, hour at work looking at these things, look after the systems on their behalf. And that's a big deal because you can think about the 7,000 water systems in California. Most of them are small. So now all of a sudden you expect in the traditional world, you expect these people to know everything about cybersecurity, and they don't. So it's a huge burden on them. Let's look at lift stations. What do we do in lift stations? Again, it's this idea of taking the collective information and showing people just what is important. So here you can see performance details, 2 pumps alternating, little black bars at the top shows what we expect the statistical behavior should be. And right there at the end, you see the performance of this pump at number 32 was way lower than what we expected it to do. You look at the health of the system, so somebody can look at their smartphone and say, everything is sort of okay, but not 100%, otherwise it would have been green. And then if you drill into the detail, you'll see that if you open this up, it says this specific pump run was much longer than usual. Normally it's around about 2.5 minutes, and now all of a sudden it was almost 8 minutes. So what may have happened is you may have a condition where something may have ragged up the pump and the pump cannot pump properly. We also have the historical information so that you can compare the efficiency of the pump over a long period of time. So they call it pucked up when fatty deposits collect on the impeller, the pumps become less efficient over time. But this way, you don't have to guess. You get all the information right there in front of your eyes. One other example is we had a customer close to the area where we live that pay a neighboring city to treat their wastewater, and it's a holiday resort city, so their use is constant throughout the year, but they get charged more during certain months of the time. And this is what we measure. You can clearly see February is much higher than June or July, but actually they've gotten more visitors in July, so it didn't make sense unless you correlate it with the rainfall. So what I've overlaid here is the rainfall figures. So now it's very clear that every time there are big rainstorms, you get a lot of water into the system. Very easy for them to justify going back and fixing water intrusion in their system, because you don't want to treat rainwater. Here's another case study. Small water system, serves about 50 homes in Sonoma County. And the human eye is pretty amazing, because you see these patterns for the steel tank, and there, right where the arrow is, you see an amazing change in the slope of the water tank level. So it's obvious to the trained eye that something is wrong. But if you don't watch this thing all the time, how would you know? And you cannot, especially for small systems, you cannot expect 24/7 staffing of a control room. What we've done is create an analytical engine called a virtual water meter. And here you can see the flow rate over time. And right when that event occurred, you can see a tremendous spike in the water usage. And we send the customer an alarm, an automatically generated alarm, within 15 minutes of the event occurring. Now, it is a little bit of a challenge, because here you can see the water usage at that site over a 52-week period. And you see the main events with a leak there. What makes it challenging is something that may be normal use in the summer is a big leak in the winter. Long story short, in this case, they found a pipe burst that was 8 feet underground in a dry water bed. They found it after a week by shutting different parts of the system down and then looking at the outflow of the tank. Now compare that to the past. Is in the past, nobody would have noticed, maybe. The only way they would have noticed is when they get the electrical bill after the end of the next month, and then they say, oh my goodness, we don't have the reserves to pay for that, and then they have to go and search for that. And in the meantime, you've had hundreds of thousands of gallons of untreated or treated water leaking into the ground there. Here's another example of how rainfall affects an aquifer. So this is a site next to the Russian River, also in Sonoma County. And what the green shows you, the upper envelope is the rest level of the aquifer. These spikes down is every time the pumps run, the level of the water above the pump drops by that amount. And then when the pump stops, it recovers to what you see in the envelope. And you can also look at it to see the health of the well itself. But right here on January the 2nd, you can see there was a lot of rain, 2-3 inches, just over 2 inches. And you can see an immediate effect that had on the aquifer. Now, they also had some rain later. The little X's is given the scale. You cannot really see it, but you can see how the aquifer charged, and then after a while, it started discharging again. What we notice in looking at a lot of these sites over a long period of time is there is a definite trend, and that trend is going down. So people are drilling deeper and deeper wells so that they can still manage their production. And that's a disturbing thing, and that is why we have the Sigma law to make these more sustainable. One of the other things that we've also been working on is what we call swift Scada, because quite often people experience disasters, so like a fire, like electricity being shut down, or hurricanes. And in some cases, they just want to monitor something for a limited period of time. This device is then a self-contained unit with a UPS. It's weatherproof. It is within the 50-pound weight limit of OSHA. And it's got this connectorized system on the side where you can put in pressure sensors or any type of sensor that you want to, and just deploy it, and it works immediately. We've seen a lot of this being used as to augment a system and make it way more redundant. So if somebody has a traditional system, something fails, they can install something like this and have an immediate view, and compare that to the old days where somebody may have to drive up to a reservoir with a walkie-talkie or a cell phone in the model world, and then communicate a level down to people so that they can actually perform the plant operations that they need to do. So in a nutshell, that is XIO, that is what we do. We have this big system that collects a tremendous amount of water, and we're starting to see the real value that we have in data and using data in a smart way, but also in a very, very secure environment. And with that, let's talk about any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Moritz. That was a great talk. And I actually, I think it was in scenario 4. I had this question as you were talking all along, because years ago, I had a problem that it was a faulty float valve on a lift station. So it never went down when it was supposed to go down, and burned out the pump and seized up the impeller. So obviously very costly as that thing kept running and sort of burning itself out. But you pretty much answered, how that would be treated by the Scada system with that longer pump run.
Yeah.
And I assume you could attach, if I remember correctly, you could attach an alarm to that. So if that pump was running, extraordinary, 60 minutes longer than it normally runs, it could shoot me an alarm and I could turn it off remotely. Did I get that right?
Yes, and we also have protections in the system, in the smart control itself, that says never allow this pump to run more than whatever the amount of time is. And then it's also about really thinking about the problem. So one of the things that we do is to put in these flow loops. So in other words, we monitor the energy, we monitor the level and say, hey, you're using less energy than you normally do, so you're not really pumping anything. There must be something wrong. Therefore, we will shut down the pump, notify you, because you have a lead lag pair, the backup will come on automatically. So long story short is, now I think you've just nailed the issue there. In the past, people wouldn't be aware. Now you get an alarm, but the alarm is interpreted. That says, look at the difference. I mean, something is wrong there. You can immediately see it.
Yes. And in fact, in that particular system, we had an audible alarm, but if you weren't near it, and I was constantly in remote settings, so if you weren't near it, it really wasn't useful at all.
Indeed. I see another question here, and the question says, what are the costs associated with this type of system? It's actually between 10 and 20% of traditional systems. And it's clear, right? Because how much does it cost Google to serve another map on a new cell phone? It's just a small incremental cost. So by looking at these patterns, we can amortize it over everything, or over all our customers. So it becomes much easier or cheaper.
Sorry, we have another question. In case study number 4, where the system sends an alert due to flow rates that are outside of the pattern, are the normal patterns based on that particular water system, or are they based on all water systems data, or are they, unique to a single system?
Yes and yes. So I mean, it's typical time series. There are cyclic events. There's a summer, there's a winter use. There are week use, there's summer use. People wake up in the morning, they take a shower. So there are all these embedded systems. But then you also see trends. So the trend going into the summer is upwards, going into the winter is downwards. And in that particular, so that is common, and we use that common knowledge to apply to everybody. But in this case, there's a huge discrepancy between summer and winter, because it's mainly, there are a lot of people with vacation homes there. So on 4th of July, you see a lot of usage, where other places you would see very little. So the answer is it applies to both cases.
Got it. It looks like that is it for the question and answers. We're coming up on the top of the hour, so to respect everyone's time, we're going to end this month's seminar. Before we do, I would like to thank you, Moritz Botha, for giving us that wonderful talk this afternoon. I would also like to thank all of the attendees for tuning in and engaging in the Q&A today. We're always looking for new speakers and ways to improve the seminar, so please do take a minute to fill out the brief feedback survey in the chat. And a link is also provided in the details of the corresponding event on the College of Water Informatics events webpage if you need some time to digest before you provide feedback. As a reminder, a recording of today's seminar will be posted in the details of the corresponding event on the College of Water Informatics events webpage. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. Thanks again, everyone, and especially Moritz Botha. We hope to see you at next month's seminar.